Welcome to another episode of the JustUs Podcast. Unfortunately, it'll just be me on my own because the other co hosts are currently busy with their finals. This might be one of the few instances where I pretty much decide if it'd be worth testing out like this new sort of format where I do episodes on my own. I don't really want to do that because I already have other things to work on, but we'll see how things turn out. Anyways, today's episode will be on Transformers Dark of the Moon, Invincible, and Sonic's 30th anniversary. Let's go from left to right as always with Dark of the Moon. So the main idea about Dark of the Moon is that if you're like unfamiliar with my channel, you should know that it's my favorite Transformers movie of all time. Sorry 86 movie, sorry G1, sorry Bumblebee, and even sorry to the first like live action Michael Bay film. Dark of the Moon is my number one favorite. Why? Well, first of all, there's so many great things about like the characters, the story, the visual effects are top notch overall, and I like the approach it has with the Autobots being endowed with the human government. Sort of like in between like the way they were in Revenge of the Fallen, where they're still on the same sort of level, as well as Age of Extinction, where the government's pretty much against them. And you can definitely see like the sort of like the build up towards how Optimus feels about the human race, in spite of the good things he's done in stopping the Decepticons and saving the planet. But yeah, Dark of the Moon pretty much focuses on the human race looking for a like the thing that crashed landed on Earth, which was the Ark, a ship that got damaged when it was leaving a planet that had groundbreaking technology to transport things from their world to anywhere else it is. The human race, specifically those involved with the space race, decide that it's time to go to the moon and decide that mankind is pretty much not not alone. Basically, from there we get to see stuff like Sentinel Prime and the way humans were reacting towards stuff like the fact that there's other potential life beyond Earth. And, it definitely puts in like it's definitely like the longest scene. In the first movie, it's pretty much Optimus Prime talking about the Allspark. Second scene was pretty much about the humans interacting with the Fallen back then in the BC era. But you get a bit of a scope about the history of humankind as well as the fact that Transformers are generally part of Earth's history in a way. Now like last night, the way they pretty much decided to put in all this history, say, oh yeah, this totally happened, and like the stuff like the Order of the Witwickens was pretty ridiculous. I mean, cool, but kind of like weird in terms of how it's handled. I mean, like the fact that Harriet Tubman was involved with the history of the Transformers, considering the fact that like it's kind of like a weird thing. Like, okay, it makes sense because they've been around in Earth's history, but it's kind of weird out of context. And of course, they'll make your typical nerd sites be like, "Oh, it's so goofy." And I hate doing that voice, but believe me, nerds like Geo nerds and pop culture sites kind of get on my nerves more than that. But yeah, like stuff like that can be kind of like ridiculous. But I think stuff like the moon having Sentinel Prime would work. Makes you wonder how Japan would actually kind of react to that because there's always been legends about how there's a lady or a rabbit on the moon. But in this case, it's Sentinel Prime. Kind of crazy if you ask me. But moving on. Years later in the present day, we have the Autobots and the US Armed Forces involved with Nest are pretty much going after like human conflicts, which really isn't exactly what they're aiming for. Like the Autobots are more interested in stopping the Decepticons more than they are going after simpler tasks like that, but they have to go along with it anyhow. Despite that, the event in the location of the power plant that was at Chernobyl turns out to have had some sort of like cell that is unknown to them, but Shockwave as well as Driller make a surprise attack and they get scared away by Optimus Prime when he has a sword and shield. And of course, we get Laserbeak going after one of the humans that are involved with the conspiracies or the co-conspiracists. The people that are working for the Decepticons. And the fact that he was responsible for getting Nest to Chernobyl got him done for. In that moment, we pretty much have Optimus Prime being upset that the human race is pretty much not telling him about this stuff. They need, like, the human race. Okay, sure, like the humans may be more higher up. The Autobots are more, you know, like the muscle of the team, but even they deserve to have this sort of respect. And for all the people that think, oh, the humans get more attention than Transformers, like they kind of acknowledge that in a way with Optimus Prime going after the like the higher ups of the humans, especially Charlotte Meaning of the Director of National Intelligence. Like they tell him everything about what happened, and Optimus gives him answers about how Sentinel Prime was in the ship. Now they need to get themselves the matrix of leadership and pretty much everything that they need to get their technology back in shape. Especially considering the fact that Decepticons are still out there, as we saw with not just Shockwave but also Megatron, Starscream, and Soundwave. And while it was kind of neat to see them together, it was only one time from what I is. And I have to say that even if they weren't frequently together as often, I mean, we mostly see Megatron and Starscream more than we do those two with Soundwave. It was a nice scene, especially when we got to see, you know, hints of what Laserbeak's been doing to any humans that were acting as loose ends towards the Decepticons. I'll never forget the scene where we get all the dead humans as like Soundwave says, "Laserbeak, kill them all with pleasure." Like that was spine chilling, and it's even worse by the fact that that Laserbeak specifically got involved in a scene where he turned into a pink bumblebee and snuck into a kid's room so he can play with them until like the father of the daughter stepped in and Laserbeak murdered the father for his connections to the Decepticons. But of course, it's not just all Transformer action, as we also get to see our human friend Sam Witwicky struggle with his own life. Unfortunately, even after being considered a hero, and along with the other Autobots, like he can't find himself a job, which really doesn't make sense. You'd expect him to work for the government at least. Maybe an ambassador would be great. Like it just seems kind of weird that that didn't happen. But anyways, he has a new girlfriend, Carly Spencer, who you would think would actually give him a job there, but like, oh well, I suppose. She left him, or rather, Michaela Baines left Sam, like in between the scenes. Although, like, that's in real life, it's because she didn't like being filmed, or she didn't. Carly Spencer lives with Sam Witwicky, and like, of course, we all know for a fact that Michaela Baines' actress Megan Fox didn't like being involved with Transformers. Like, she had beef with Mike, she had beef with Steven, and she was pretty much fired. Like since then, they like apologized to each other and have been like not necessarily in touch with each other frequently, but they at least have water under the bridge. But that was like that was last year compared to today or at the time, which is like a different time period for them. But now we have Sam Carly as well as William Brains. They pretty much decide to live together basically, and we start finding out about the fact that Sam now gets a new job as a mail carrier, but things get really weird because Jerry Wang is sort of like at first he's a sort of weird guy. I mean, he gets him in a bathroom stall at one point, but the craziness of it makes sense because he has been uh, collaborating with the Decepticons. Unfortunately, Jerry Wayne gets killed by Laserbeak, and this causes Sam to start delving into learning more about what's going on. Why are there humans collaborating with the Decepticons? And that's kind of like one of the things I like about Dark of the Moon is the fact that humans like okay, we already know that Nest can be pretty rough in areas. We know that Sector 7 could be very, uptight and strict towards anyone else that's involved with the non-biological extraterrestrials. But the fact that they're humans collaborating with the Decepticons, while not a new idea per se, is something that would make sense in the live action film series because there's a chance there'll always be scummy humans working with the bad guys. Generally speaking, like Sam pretty much can't be involved with this, even in spite of his connections with the Autobots. Like he knows Bumblebee, he knows like Optimus, but they still don't really trust him because they see him as a mere messenger. But while that happens, he looks for Seymour Simmons, who we saw in the previous two films, and considering the fact that he's a new guy entirely in a way, I mean, he's become a billion. He's like a millionaire now. He's been having his new life quite well, even if that somehow gets different when he gets shown at a last night. But that's a different story. Like Sam and Simmons decided it's now like that the Decepticons have been thinking about some sort of weird plan involving the pillars of the Ark even before they were like before the humans discovered them. And there's also some weird suspicious thing involving Sentinel Prime. Like nobody knows why Sentinel was like left behind, but he would only be the one that would activate the space bridge, and the only one that could activate him is Optimus. I mean, some could pretty much say like, "Oh, like why can't this happen? Why can't like this happen before?" But like, truth is, Dark of the Moon wasn't written at the time when Revenge of the Fallen came out. I mean, just like after Dark of the Moon came, like after Revenge of the Fallen came out, like I think around like early 2010, Dark of the Moon was announced. That was like 6 months, 7 months before. Like you can make the arguments about why is all this going on. But even then, Dark of the Moon came out 2 years later, so like you can't really complain about something that wasn't made yet. But you can always make some sort of headcanon involving what goes on, unless it's something that's really obvious and needs to be fixed easily. Perhaps some fill-in material from the IDW comics could explain it. But back to the discussion. Sentinel Prime gets revived by Optimus, and at first, it all turns out to be nice and smooth, Like, they he's revived. I mean, he initially gets a little hostile towards Optimus, but he realizes what's going on and decides to like be with the Autobots for a bit. And now with Sentinel involved, like he's pretty much accepted into the team. And I even like the scene where Optimus and Sentinel are in Africa and enjoy the world itself. I'll never forget the lines such as him saying, "This world is so nice and peaceful, unlike the final days of Cybertron." And seeing Optimus being praised by Sentinel for doing what he can to protect this world, and Optimus giving the Matrix to Sentinel, which interestingly Sentinel didn't want. And he said the lines of like "I'm no longer your teacher, but you're mine now," which was kind of like a nice nod to the fact that Optimus now knows more about Sentinel ever since Sentinel has been inactive for so long. And it is a great way for you to learn to think that Sentinel Prime's on this team. However, after Sam and Simmons investigate what's going on, we pretty much get to the big twist after the crazy highway chase, where Sentinel indeed reveals that he's been revived because the Decepticons are after him, and Sentinel admits that that they're never going to win the war, especially considering what's going on with Cybertron. And he infamously said that for the sake of our planet's survival, a deal had to be made with Megatron. So he grabs his gun, points it at Ironhide, and ends up shooting him, which surprised a lot of people, myself included, because no one expected that to happen. In fact, even if people were still upset about Ironhide's death, what I like about the scene is that no one saw it coming. People are obsessed saying, "Oh my gosh, Shockwave, Shockwave, Shockwave," but no one expected Sentinel to kill his own Autobot. And of course, in the tie-in stuff, Sentinel killed the twins as well, which probably would have been cool to see in the movie because it would have been a great way to redeem them, especially considering how people were still pissed off at the twins in Revenge. The main point is that, the twins were, dead. They were only shown in one scene when the Autobots were in the hangar, but main point is that the Autobot that the heroes looked up to, Sentinel, was a traitor. And we can always do this debate about like, oh, he didn't, we shouldn't have done it, or like, but the thing is that no one saw it coming. Like, no one suspected anything weird about him until like Sam Wiki did. And before you ask about why the Autobots didn't suspect anything, well, as we mentioned before, the humans were hiding stuff from them, and they needed the help of the humans to learn about what's going on in this case. So you can definitely say that both the Autobots and the humans need each other because both of them have benefits that make them dependent on each other in some ways. Unfortunately, it did cost him the life of Ironhide, but like I said, the fact that Ironhide's death was a surprise makes sense, considering how Sentinel was hidden from like the story as being the true antagonist of the film, not Shockwave, but Sentinel. And while people can still complain about how Shockwave should have been the main antagonist, let me tell you that I much prefer like a twist like this. Like, don't do stuff like the Mandarin from Iron Man 3 being some sort of like businessman with glowing powers instead of the guy who looks more like the Mandarin but is more of just a decoy that says, "Oh, my name is Trevor Slattery." Give me stuff like this where the main antagonist is the least suspecting guy ever. Sure, Pixar has done stuff like this. I mean, the movie before this one, like Toy Story 3, had Lotso. In fact, you could argue that Lotso and Sentinel Prime have things in common. But like the truth is that Pixar does these sort of things, and like you can definitely see it like, in some way that they're going to be like this before. And of course, Toy Story 2 years before, like had friggin' Stinky Pete as the main antagonist. But the fact that you have someone like Sentinel Prime, who is an Autobot, and in this universe was more respectful to Optimus than an animated, that was mind blown by the fact that Sentinel Prime actually got against the Autobots in this series. And for those that don't know, Sentinel Prime in animated is pretty much like a jerk. I mean, he's part of the elite guard. He's like a self-centered asshole. Whereas in this guy, Sentinel Prime's more of a nationalist and is someone that wants to have Cybertron his own vision and sees Optimus fail because he thinks Optimus was like more focused on Earth than on his own home planet. But yeah, after the big twist, the Autobots like fight against the Decepticons while Optimus goes after Sentinel because like that scene itself is also great to see, like their conflict. We just went from the last time they were together being them in a peaceful environment in Africa, like enjoying the beauty of the planet Earth, to seeing them within Washington D.C. fighting each other. Optimus not wanting to get Sentinel, like and the Decepticon side, and Sentinel berating Optimus for not seeing things the way he does. Like that was great. And even seeing Megatron and Starscream feel victorious. Like, they were victorious already when they killed Optimus Revenge of the Fallen, but here it's a different way that they're victorious because they have one of the Autobots' biggest assets on their side. Like, that's kind of nuts when you ask me, especially in retrospect with like the way we no longer get films that feel as like devoted towards attention to detail as this. And unfortunately, the Autobots remain like defeated. The human race is experiencing like travesty across the world from the Decepticon invasion. Sentinel Prime gives a message, a threat, that they'll be left alone if the Autobots go into exile. And we get one of the saddest scenes in not just the live action film series, but also in Transformers in general. Like the Autobots are going into exile after the Wreckers create the Xantium. And, not everyone got to say their goodbyes to Sam, but the fact that, like, we just got, like, Sentinel killing Ironhide, Sentinel joining the Decepticons, well, not outright joining them, but more so, like, assisting Megatron, like, the human race being killed. Decepticons are now on planet Earth. We also got stuff like, Carly being kidnapped by Soundwave. And the fact that her boss, as well as Sam's boss in a way, is a conspiracist of the Decepticons. And then we get the reminder that Sentinel that the Autobots must leave or else more humans will die. Like this has been like one of the worst days ever, one of the worst few moments of the Autobots. Even if it's in a way like one of the best moments of the live action film series, because like they like even though we already know they're going to win, what I like is that fact that they make this feel like they're not going to win. And they make you want to root for them, but more importantly, they make them feel like they're on their backs in this case. Optimus Prime tells Sam Witwicky that this is all his fault, that he is to blame for what's happened, and even though the Autobots aren't going to help out, he tells him that the fight will be on his own. And as he goes into the ship, Bumblebee does a tearful goodbye as well. I mean, he didn't cry in this scene. He did cry in Revenge of the Fallen, but that's more so just to like get Sam to convince him that he should go. Because Bumblebee doesn't really like since he doesn't talk, he pretty much like Bumblebee. Like, he kind of uses like visual aids in some ways. Maybe I don't know. It's like I don't know what the right words are, but like the fact that he uses like his radio clips to tell Sam he could always be his friend, and it's been great being with him, was like emotional. Nobody knew what was going to happen, because like what happened after the humans like saw the Autobots enter the ship and going to orbit, going to space. The next thing we saw was Starscream in space, launching his missiles and destroying the rocket, and that was a huge surprise. I mean, okay, you could definitely say like, what about the trailers? They show Optimus and the other Autobots in the city. Now you could say that too. Like you can argue that we already know they're going to win, but the way they make you feel like they aren't going to win is what made it work. It's stuff like this is what makes Dark of the Moon great. Like it makes you wonder what's going to happen next. Will they survive? Will they make it? Like, well, is this over? I mean, you can argue for the fact that like, oh, they shouldn't show all this stuff in the trailers. But like, by logic, you shouldn't see the trailer either. If that makes sense. Like, there's always going to be some sort of weird like debate or comments, no matter what sort of thing you try to defend it gets. But like, my main takeaway is that the fact that Dark of the Moon makes you feel like you're going to be seeing stuff like this, where you're in doubt of what's going to happen next, in terms of who will win or who won't win, is what makes the film great. It has great surprises on top of it feeling intelligent when it comes to how the Autobots don't like being like not getting access towards any important stuff from the humans, as well as the fact that now they need the human friend Sam Witwicky to lend a hand in breaking the code about why there's humans working with the Decepticons, and why Sentinel Prime is left behind on the moon while most of the tech has been stolen. From there, Sam Witwicky and the remaining human allies decide that now they gotta stick together and make sure that no more Decepticons cause more havoc, because of course Sentinel lied. We get a battle in downtown Chicago, which I wish I got to see them film, because I live in Chicago and I wish I got to see like the filming sequences. Oh my god, I was so close. And it's even worse when it comes to the fact that they returned for Age of Extinction for the new scenes that took place around there. And the last night, which I think was a few sequences that were there. Like, it's been a while since I saw the last night, so I don't know where they exactly filmed. But like, main takeaway is that lesson learned. If you live in a city, like ask your parents back then to like take you there, because you never know when they're not gonna when they're gonna stop filming, and you never know who uh, childhood memories, man. Like nostalgia, man. But yeah, moving on. The Autobots return, surprising everybody. Optimus Prime tells the humans that like the Decepticons will never leave their planet alone, and they're going to come back and stop the Decepticons once and for all. Bumblebee returns, Sideswipe and Ratchet return, Dino shows up, Q as well, and three Wreckers, Rotobuster, Leadfoot, and Topspin return. And it was great. I love seeing that scene a lot. Definitely gives you like the reminder that we're not done yet, guys. We're gonna do this one last time. Well, apart from when we returned for Age of Extinction the last night, but for now, let's just pretend that there's no TF4 or 5. All right. And the fact that they're gonna come back and put an end to the Decepticons this way has been great. I mean, we get to see them fight against the cons, It was great to see like Optimus, like the Wreckers, go against Shockwave so they can retrieve the trailer. It was great to see Wheelie and Brains even contribute a bit. It was great to see like everyone in general, the good guys, contribute in one way or another. Whether it's the Autobots shooting down the Decepticons, Optimus using his flight tech to like kill Driller until Shockwave shoots him at one point. It was great to see Nest like help out the Autobots shoot the Decepticons. It was also great to see Sam Witwicky even contribute a bit by taking down some of the flyers with the help of Bumblebee, as well as rescue Carly from the clutches of Dylan Gold, who was the human conspiracy to work with Soundwave. And we get a few good scenes as well that aren't just action based, like when the Autobots were held hostage by the Decepticons. Dylan Gold shows a bit of like a more like a less more hesitant form of himself when he talks about how there shouldn't be any sort of prisoners, and he was in a way kind of concerned about what they're going to do until Soundwave mentions the iconic line of "No prisoners, only trophies," and it was great to see stuff like Bumblebee feel doubtful about what's going to happen, but the fact that that Bumblebee was nearly going to get killed by the Decepticons, like once again, was kind of emotional. I mean, we just saw him like take down Starscream in the previous scene when he was helping at one point the humans at the last second, like with taking down the Seeker. But the fact that the humans were pretty much like Soundwave with the humans like Sam and Carly were going to witness Bumblebee die until William Brains like destroy one of the Decepticon ships was shocking. And of course, now the Autobots and the humans go against the Decepticons. Optimus helps out by killing a large amount of cons as well as Shockwave before we get to the final fight involving him and Megatron. Wait, I'm sorry, not Megatron. Sentinel. Because earlier in the film, Sentinel tells Megatron to fuck off because Megatron was like wanting Sentinel to be like a full-on Decepticon. But like Sentinel says that I'm only working with, but not for you. Like he doesn't see himself as a true Decepticon. All he wants to do is just like spite Optimus for not being able to like help save Cybertron the way he wanted. And we get into a great fight sequence, which I think is better than even the fight sequences of Optimus versus Megatron in the first movie, or Optimus versus the Fallen, because we get more like action between the two characters. Like Optimus with his axe and his blade, Sentinel with his like dual sword and his shield. The two of them fighting against each other. The master and the student are going against each other in this fight. And considering the fact that Sentinel Prime also has backup of his own, was like definitely a way for you to start rooting for Optimus. Meanwhile, like while Sam Witwicky tries to go against Dylan for being involved with the Decepticon conspiracies, he chose sides and he chose wrong. But Sam Witwicky comes back to him by saying he's a messenger by knocking Dylan out, shocking him with the pillar before Bumblebee destroys it, along with the other Autobots. Meanwhile, Carly Witwicky tells Megatron that, like Sentinel Prime, if he kills Optimus, will be Megatron's boss, and Megatron will be Sentinel's bitch, which upsets Megatron, but he realizes the fact that he can probably go against Sentinel and reclaim the overall role as Decepticon leader. That was enough to get Megatron up on his feet, because just as when Sentinel was about to kill Optimus, Megatron shows up, shoots him, and says, "This is my planet," and says that he wants to get back in charge. What would he be? And what would Optimus be without him? Optimus replies with the iconic "Time to find out," deploys his mouthplate, and uses his remaining arm to decapitate Megatron with the axe, before he grabs Megatron's shotgun and shoots and shoots Sentinel. Like this, so much to talk about this movie. I wish everyone else was here to talk about Dark of the Moon with me, but like this movie's just so good. There's just so much to talk about when it comes to the action as well as the characters. And it's kind of a shame that I feel like one of the few people that understands Dark of the Moon quite well. But like, it was great to see Optimus go against Sentinel, who was pretty much pleading for him to let him live. And Sentinel foolishly said, "You must see why I had to betray you." While Optimus says that he didn't betray him, but he betrayed himself, delivering one final blow to Sentinel, or two in this case, by shooting him once in the chest and then shooting him in the head, putting an end to the former Prime. And Optimus now reunites with the humans, as well as the Autobots, and make a bit of a happy ending scene. So much to talk about Dark of the Moon than I expected. But the main thing is that when it comes to Transformers Dark of the Moon, main takeaway is that it's just a great film overall. I'd say it's up there with one of my favorites, and I know for a fact that the first movie is iconic, but I think Dark of the Moon is the better film. It's more than just the action, it's smarter in a way when it comes to discussing how suspicious and dangerous it could be for humans to be involved with the Decepticons, and especially considering the theories as to why all like Sentinel Prime and some of the pillars were left behind, while everything else was stolen. And the fact that Sentinel Prime betrayed the Autobots was crazy to think about, but it makes sense in the context of the film, even if poor old Ironhide got killed. And I know people are going to say, like, well, what about 1986? Like, that's okay. You can like that for different reasons, but I think the movie's overrated just because, like, people say, oh, it's G1, 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 but, like, it's basically just a copy and paste of Star Wars films made at the time. And people are gonna be like, "Oh, what about Bumblebee?" Like, I don't like Bumblebee's movie. It's so basic. It basically copies all the other uh, child protagonist meets character from Otherworld film. At least the first movie was felt more original, much more original, instead of it just being like E.T. made in 2018 with a character that was from a pre-existing franchise. And I know for a fact that we're going to get Rise of the Beast at some point, and while I am excited to see what Rise of the Beast could offer, I don't want to immediately say that it's going to be inferior to Dark of the Moon, but for now, I doubt that it'll have the same level of success, for me at least, that Dark of the Moon has. Because, long story short, Dark of the Moon is a tremendous Transformers movie. It puts our characters at the wall in some ways. It knows how to put them in corners. It knows when to surprise people. It knows how to make the Autobots question the involvement of the humans in this case before we see like things crumble in Age of Extinction between Cemetery Wind hunting them down, as well as Optimus Prime starting to show his hatred towards humans. Like, it knows how to do all this stuff, and while people might argue that, it's all too much action and whatnot, what's the excuse of the films that they praise that have even more action or less to reflect on? Either way, Dark of the Moon gets a 5 out of 5 from me. It's a great experience overall, and I hope my rambling was enough to convince you all to enjoy it. If not, well, too bad, too sad. But yeah, Dark of the Moon, best Transformers movie ever. Next up, we'll be talking about Invincible, the Amazon Prime Video series based on the Image Comics title that involves superheroes in ways we have not quite seen them in mainstream media. Now, we've seen a lot of stuff from Marvel and DC, right? And it's kind of a breath of fresh air to have other comic properties take the spotlight that is not from either one of them. I will say, though, that while we reviewed The Boys, I've not personally seen it since I honestly haven't been that interested in it. I mean, at first, I was interested in seeing the uh, franchise itself when it first came out, but over time I started to find myself less and less devoted to it because like it just felt so much like a pretty obvious BVS type of parody. I mean, sure, it might acknowledge stuff like Joss and whatnot, but it just felt pretty much like someone made a parody of BVS, even if The Boys was based on a pre-existing property. Invincible, on the other hand, was one I've always wanted to check out. I mean, sure, you could argue the fact that it's animated and not live action, but it's the way it's done. Like Invincible feels brand new. Sure, it's got an image like comic series that was made before the show, but it feels like I've never seen this before. Like it's sure okay, it's familiar at times, but it feels unique. It has an identity of its own. Whereas you look at the boys and you look at Homelander, and he looks like an obvious Superman type of guy. Now, in terms of the story for the boys, I think it is done up quite well, if you ask me. So basically, it's your typical coming of age story where Mark, the son of Nolan Grayson, who is Omni Man, and gets powers of his own, and while he might not be prepared for it, he wants to continue being the sort of superhero is that his father pretty much is, especially considering the fact that his father, along with the Guardians of the Globe, were able to stop monsters like the Muller twins, who were invading the White House. Generally speaking, it was a great like introduction to a franchise, not because of the action, but because we get to see their world. How the Guardians of the Globe are very like kind of like real takes on traditional superheroes. I mean, obviously the Justice League are the inspirations, but they feel like them, but they're not exactly like them compared to the boys, which feel like obvious like BVS type riffs, if you ask me. And it was great to see, the first episode end with with Mark becoming invincible, the superhero, and it was great to see stuff like him training with his father, him like learning how to fly, and the fact that he got his own suit. And what I also liked was his encounter in the school when the bully tried to uh like beat his ass. First he was able to like struggle a bit, but when he got his powers, he kept on telling the bully to try and punch him, which caused the bully to just call him a freak when he felt no pain. And surprisingly, we get an idea of what's to come with Invincible, the series, because while he becomes his own superhero, Nolan, aka Omni Man, and traps all the Guardians and like kills them all. Like it's kind of crazy that we're already into this sort of situation because you would think Omni Man would be like your good guy, your main good guy, but the fact that he's done all this behind the scenes has been pretty concerning. Meanwhile, we go on from the story and the GDA, the Global Defense Agency, whatnot, like when it tries like revives like Nolan, no problem, but the other Guardians are dead. Meanwhile, the Flaxons attack, and Mark gets help from the team to go up against him. Which surprisingly, the Flaxons are weak because their powers aren't able to like withstand the sort of uh, ages. Like they age rapidly and retreat because of the time dilation that's between their world and Earth. From there, Mark realizes that one of his classmates is Adam Eve, and they become friends. Well, the Flaxons return with their anti-aging tech. The teens take him on and force him to retreat. And once again, they nearly win until Nolan shows up and gets rid of them, and surprisingly destroys their planet when the after he shows up. Unfortunately, that does mean that he uh the news breaks out that the Guardians are dead, and we get to see Alan the alien who wants to try and test the defenses of Earth, which forces uh like Mark to realize that it's not Earth, but it's another planet called Urath. And of course, it's not over yet for like regarding the death of the Guardians as Damien Darkblood starts investigating who could have been the killer. So there's pretty much someone that's among them, and one of them is Sussy. Okay, enough of the stupid jokes. Moving on, we get another episode that involves the burial of the Guardians, and in that moment, Nolan starts being questioned by Darkblood about what's going on. In the meantime, while the Guardian roster is being made, we also get to see the likes of the friggin' Monster Teens show up. Well, actually, other heroes, a teen team. I kind of got confused. I was thinking about Monster Girl because I was thinking of that one random series, Monster High, but that's something else. I don't know what even that is. But yeah, the team and the other heroes of Monster Girl, Black Samson, and Shrinking Ray come together to go up against the likes of the other enemies. But Eve doesn't want to be involved because of Rexplode uh, cheating on her with Duplicate. Meanwhile, Mark hits the number of Amber, and things seemingly gets fine at first until Mount Rushmore gets attacked by Doc's Seismic, and yeah, it's kind of like an internal conflict because they want to be together, but at the same time they have someone to stop. And unfortunately, the Maulers escape, which causes them to basically like forces like one of them to one of like the robots to sacrifice one another. Well, actually, I'm getting mixed up again. I was thinking about like one scene where uh one of the monsters was pretty much going up against like in the scene where like the Maulers are shooting each other. I kind of like thought that was a robot thing, but no, it's actually the Maulers. Like one of the Maulers sacrificed himself as a human shield. I don't know what that sort of like mix up was. I was thinking too much about the friggin' video, but actually, yeah, one of the Maulers shot each other, and that's sort of a like my mind versus what's actually going on. Kind of a brain fart moment, but yeah, it's kind of a tense scene to see like one of the Maulers sacrifice one another just so they can escape, and basically we get to see uh, the episode end with Nolan being sensed by or like sensing Darkblood's presence, and like it's not over yet. Actually, at that moment in the next episode, uh, the Guardians killer has not been announced yet, and they start to go over what's going on. And when told to rescue a mission or save Mars, uh, Nolan refuses because he wants to protect Earth, and that's Mark's turn. And unfortunately, he can't really rescue the astronauts by the Martians. And basically, there's like another conflict that goes on between Mark with the astronauts, and unfortunately, a Martian replaced one of the astronauts as like a decoy, or like not really a decoy, but more of like a Trojan horse sort of trap. And in the meantime, Nolan and his wife Debbie are at home on vacation because they want to basically feel less like they didn't want to try and keep themselves together because things have been quite tense for both of them, basically. However, Cecil finds out that Nolan is a killer, but he needs to know like what's the motivation, and he banishes Darkblood, who actually hid his notepad in Debbie's closet, which is going to be kind of a way to bite them in the ass in a way. However, things get even worse because the surviving Mauler starts cloning himself, and they end up deforming Rudy Connors. But things are not even done just yet because, like, after finding the notepad, uh, she starts looking up what's going on with the suit of Nolan while he's gone, and things aren't going as well for everybody because civilians aren't being protected that well. Meanwhile, Robot goes to the Mauler twins with a job offer, and we get to see that like Mark wants to be with Amber because she hasn't been able to, or he hasn't been able to like be with her as much while he was Invincible, the superhero. And things get even worse when he has to like help one of the super like Titans defeat the Machine Head. And well, the Guardians do arrive. Uh, Mark wants a girl in Black Samson get beaten by Thok, Battle Beast, and everyone else, which forces everyone else to like act as a team. And it's kind of one of those moments where you know we get to see what's truly going on. I mean, it sounds like a traditional episode at first, but then uh, things get even crazier when they find out that during his hospitalization, they get Mark's blood, and they find out that Mark's blood cells are like invulnerable to anything that's used against him. And things get even crazier when we get into the next few episodes. Like Mark, at first things get normal for Mark when he's pretty much with everyone else, and after his recovery, although unfortunately Amber breaks up with him because he was gone, but he decides to like rescue William and Rick from Sinclair. Although things get kind of messed up when one of them becomes a cyborg. Meanwhile, things get even crazier when it comes to the fact that Rosenbaum starts looking over the suit of Nolan, which reveals the fact to Debbie that Nolan killed the Guardians, and they decided to stay agree, but unfortunately Debbie gets drunk, which is pretty unfortunate because she respects her husband a lot, but the fact that he was a cold-blooded murderer that killed the other Guardians definitely like just like made her reasonably upset, and she unfortunately got drunk, which is kind of like a fucked up thing considering the fact that, as I mentioned, I didn't expect him to actually kill the other Guardians right away. And the fact that it's been hidden for so long throughout the series is even worse. And while that's going on, some of the girls involved in the teen team decide that they'd rather skip college and use their powers to help with humanitarian endeavors, which is not a bad thing. After that, Debbie meets up with the GDA, and they get to witness what's going on with Nolan, who killed Cecil's associate, and they find out that he's actually gone quite messed up. And yeah, it's just kind of one of those crazy things because like no one, like we already see like evil Superman type characters, but the fact that there's one that's more of like it's like crazy into such a matter with Omni Man, the way he was presented is even worse when you consider the fact that we didn't really see him as a good guy immediately. I mean, like we saw him right away, but the fact that he turned against everyone for the most part is even worse in terms of their world. And like Mark shows up, but is things get even worse when it comes to the fact that Amber like doesn't want to be with him, and unfortunately it is Eve because of what's going on. And yeah, it's even worse when the fact that like Cecil tells Eve to not be with Mark and the Guardians, and like, just rendezvous with the Guardians basically, and like Mark decides to go up against his father and avenge everybody, which gets to the final battle with Nolan going against his own son. At that point, the craziest moment in the series is also the one episode where we get the infamous thank mark meme shows up, where like like we get a twist in the story this time. You know, like Nolan was never a true defender of Earth. He was only an infiltrator that was meant to conquer the planet from the Viltrumite Empire. He fails to convince his son to join him, and he destroys Chicago. Again, another city that involves like destruction. Like first Transformers Arc of the Moon, now this in this podcast episode, kind of crazy. But yeah, like many were killed during the battle, and unfortunately, Mark gets his ass beaten so badly by Nolan. However, as things nearly start to like fall apart, Nolan realizes his own humanity and actually shows that he cares for his son before he leaves the planet Earth. The Guardians and Eve return, and they all learn about what happened with Omni-Man's betrayal and falsifying the death of Nolan in order to keep the two identities a secret. And it's pretty kind of like a sad ending in a way because you know not only is the fact that there's so many have been killed in the city, but we also find out that the Viltrumite fleet is coming, and things get even worse for the fact that it's almost like a war's coming, especially considering the fact that some loose ends have been tied up, mainly the Muller's being arrested and the fact that uh, you know like things might get back to normal for Mark's life. And things are even going to get even tougher when it comes to the fact that evil is coming to Earth, and as I mentioned before, it's going to be almost like a war in the series. So yeah, kind of a crazy plot for Invincible, but it's kind of one of those shows that actually manages to wow me, just because it's not a typical comic book show. It feels like it has things of its own that give it its specific identity. You know, it's not based on anything that's been there, done that. It feels unique to me, at least, especially as an animated show. I mean, the setting, like the high school setting, might have been done before, but like the way it's executed in this case feels so unique, and so it feels like it has an identity of its own that no other show or film quite captures. Especially when it comes to the characters. I mean, okay, sure, Omni Man is your obvious Superman type guy, and the rest of the Guardians of the Globe are kind of like the Justice League or some of them like the Avengers. But the main takeaway is the fact that they feel original despite those tropes being taken. And more importantly, it works quite well in terms of the universe that they're in. I also like the fact that the show itself, while violent, doesn't use the violence as just a gimmick. I mean, we always get to see people on websites that appeal towards boomers on the internet by saying, "Oh, this is a dark, gritty take on the series of your childhood." But here it actually shows the violence as being real because most superhero related media doesn't really show the consequences of violence. I mean, okay, I'm not saying that like comic book shows like the Fox Kids Marvel stuff or Batman the Animated Series are G rated, but at times they feel like they're kind of hesitant to show the consequences of being a hero when it comes to injuries and whatnot. And in this case, it feels like the truest form of that when it comes to animated stuff, where they show how bloody a battle can be when it comes to how gruesome action can get, especially when it came to Omni Man killing the Guardians of the Globe. And I also have to comment on the animation itself. It's very good, I have to say. Most animated shows tend to have the similar sort of formula to it in terms of the animation style, where it feels kind of basic. But this, I think, while similar to the DC animated shows, and I guess some of the Marvel shows, okay, not really like okay, well, it feels like it's reminiscent of Earth's Mightiest Heroes from Disney XD for Avengers. But like the animation style definitely feels reminiscent of that, as well as some of the old DC animated universe movies that are adaptations of comic like media. It's like Death of Superman, as well as the Dark Knight Returns movie, and not Justice League Throne of Atlantis. I think that's one of the titles because it's surprisingly good. I mean, no one expected. Like usually they think that animation like that would for like older audience members would either have to be anime or have to be a more comedic approach because they might think it'd be too flashy or whatnot. But the fact that the animation itself is done so well is a bonus for Invincible because it feels like okay, some might think it might look like a traditional show, but the way it's presented in this world sort of excuses that by making it feel like a nice, tight, and functional series overall. And especially considering the fact that it's a unique title, compared to most of the adult superhero shows out there. It gets my respect for that. I mean, some will say Harley Quinn is great, but I don't really care much about Harley Quinn. Um, just because it kind of feels like the humor in there is just so obvious and not as creative. I mean, there's a line where someone says, that where Harley Quinn says a guy who fucks bats, and it's like, come on now, be better than that. I'm not saying that the humor in Invincible is like 100 times better, but it just feels more, like it feels less cheap and basic in terms of the way it's written and the way it's animated. And I also have to say that the voice cast was also tremendous. I mean, obviously, J. Jonah Jameson is like the spot takes all the spotlight, and I just realized I called him J. Jonah Jameson. J.K. Simmons. I mean, okay, J. Jonah Jameson. Yeah, like he's pretty much like like J.K. Simmons and J. Jonah Jameson are hard to separate. Okay, and the fact that he's in another sort of comic book role type series is amusing, considering the fact that he's also known for being Spider-Man's critic. J.K. All these J's, man. So he's basically best known for playing J. Jonah Jameson in the Spider-Man movies directed by Sam Raimi, as well as having a cameo appearance in Far From Home, as and to a lesser extent being known for playing as Commissioner Gordon in uh, Justice League, although not as much prominence as I was hoping, but he was there. Although I kind of prefer his role as J. Jonah Jameson because it just seems so like it just fits him very well. But beyond that, like obviously J.K. Simmons steals the show, and as well as the fact that we get his lines and his performance, you get the feeling that it's actually him, and he works well with the character of Omni Man as much as he does J. Jonah Jameson. But Stephen Yeun voicing, I do apologize for pronouncing his name, but his voice of Mark is done up very well. He doesn't sound like he been there, done that type of young male voice actor, like young adult voice actor type guy. And he feels like he knows how to capture the youthful spirit of a character while putting him in sort of like a berserker type of situation that he might be in when he's in the roughest of battles that Viltrumites like him would experience. I mean, he's half Viltrumite, half human, and I like the way he's presented when it comes to how much of a struggle it is to be a superhero while identifying himself in this sort of world. Sandra Orr as Debbie Grayson, she does what she needs to do. Uh, she was a great performance as Debbie Grayson, and I felt bad for her when she got drunk during the end of the first season because, like, the fact that her loving husband was a murderer of the Guardians of the Globe is like rightfully upsetting. You know, the other characters, like the other Guardians of the Globes, weren't there as much as I like. But I will say that it was interesting to see that the old team was like was more inspired by the Justice League, while the new team was inspired by the Avengers in some ways. Kind of amusing, if you ask me. But it was cool to hear voices from the likes of Fred Tatasciore, as well as characters like Ezra Miller, surprisingly, who was the voice of Sinclair. Like I didn't expect Ezra Miller to be in there. I mean, we don't know exactly what kind of roles he's usually in, but considering the fact that he was not just in the Justice League, but he's also been in this series, kind of feels crazy in a way. Clancy Brown voicing Damien Darkblood, who is kind of like your Hellboy type guy, works well. Mark Hamill, I mean, you expect Mark Hamill to be in some media at times. He works well as a tailor, as well as a friend to the many superheroes. Zazie Beetz, who you might best recognize for being in stuff like uh, Domino from Deadpool 2. Like, she was there as well. So, yeah, I mean, you might say that it's pretty much me discovering the fact that uh, comic book related actors are in other comic book related media, but kind of amusing how that turns out, if you ask me. So, if there's other things I have to say about Invincible, I also have to praise the series just because it knows how to be like unafraid of showing off these consequences, as I mentioned before, when it comes to being a superhero. Like, no, like being a superhero is not going to be fun at times, especially compared to the way we used to see it back then, where it's all like, yeah, I want to be like Spider Man or Superman. And then as you get older, you start realizing just how painful it is and how messed up it's going to be. And we see that with something like this. I mean, I would believe that someone like Debbie would be like upset to hear the news about her living husband being someone that killed other heroes. And I also like seeing how Mark was struggling in being a hero because everyone else that he knows is going to be with or against him, and he's going to be in a lot of pain no matter what happens. And of course, lest we forget, the Invincible logo gets bloodier every subsequent episode. And that makes me want to see how they're going to do stuff like this in season 2 and 3. I've not read the comics just yet, but I do want to just to see how different they are. But one thing's for sure is that a series like Invincible knows how to feel like a worthwhile show, if you ask me, especially considering the fact that it's one of those franchises that feels unique compared to most of the other stuff we've gotten of late, which feels quite been there, done that. Because, okay, the other series I could think of that's like an animated, adult oriented superhero or comic book related show is Modoc. But it does feel more reminiscent of The Office in some ways. Maybe not exactly, but you get what I'm saying. But I will say that I have not seen Modoc, but I kind of want to. But I have to praise the animation style because it's animation, it's like stop motion animation. But my main point is that some stuff feels like it kind of riffs on the like a dark, dark mature gimmick, or it's sort of got the same sort of writing style of humor that we get from Robot Chicken. And I have to give praise to Invincible for feeling like it's an official series you can take seriously without the adult thing just being the only thing that matters because the writing, the animation, and the voice performances are all great. And however long we'll have to wait for season 2 and 3, which are announced, but we'll see when they'll come out. It's been great to check out this great show, if you ask me. And yeah, I feel like once again I've talked so much about Invincible as much as I did Dark of the Moon. It's some great stuff, if you ask me. And finally, in hopes of making this shorter, we'll be talking about Sonic the Hedgehog and his 30th anniversary. Now, let me tell you that I may have not been around entirely when it came to the release schedule of Sonic the Hedgehog, but I do remember the time when I first saw gameplay of Sonic Heroes way back around 2004 or 5 when I came to a cousin's house. And while I didn't see much of it, I do remember seeing a video of Team Rose on one of Eggman's ships, which is one of the last few levels that occurs in the game. Years later, I check out the same cousin's collection of Sonic classic games that was on PS2. I think it was the Mega Collection Remix. And it wasn't until I got my own proper Sonic game, Sonic Heroes, which should probably have a video of its own to talk about, but generally speaking, I think it's way better than people give it credit to. Not perfect, mind you, but I still think that it's a much better game than people say because I think too many people are kind of harsh on it, but with that being said, I want to talk about for as briefly as I can about why Sonic's 30th anniversary matters. Because many people kind of shit on Sonic for some of the pettiest reasons. Not saying that he's 100% perfect, and I know for a fact that he's went through some terrible experiences in terms of the franchise. But that being said, the legacy of Sonic is quite massive, if you ask me. Whether it's from the classic games or the modern games, or for the games made around the late 90s, early 2000s, and this blue blur is not going anywhere, if you ask me. And while many people are happy to pretty much make any of the typical complaints on some of the modern stuff, I have to give credit for Sega with trying to balance things out, giving focus on the past as well as giving new stuff a chance. It's something that I like seeing Sega do of late, especially considering how one wants them to, continue the legacy while still giving back to the fans that grew up with the classic stuff. And regardless of your opinions on the Sonic franchise, I have to give credit to them for being so committed to continuing on. From every stumble that they make, they always come back up one way or another. And regardless of how big or how small the comeback is, I still think that they've done quite a lot to prove themselves that they're a franchise that has as much legacy and importance as something like Mario or Zelda. Of course, every video game franchise is going to have duds of its own. Sonic '06 is no exception. And I know for a fact that Sonic Forces was very disappointing. And of course, the Sonic Boom games are pretty meh overall. But that being said, I do find the fact that they're pretty much great to look into because, well, people are going to say for a fact that there's going to be an expectation for quality and standards with the older stuff. Can you really say that overall, but just because it's better praised or just because it's more, uh, like, well, it's better to say that just because you won't get death threats from classicists? Because no Sonic game is going to be better than the other. I mean, there's some that one would like more than the other, but even if the modern games aren't the best, I do find the classic games, while iconic, aren't exactly the of all be all standard for Sonic games. Like, I know for a fact that some of the ports that were made at times, like the GameCube version of Sonic Adventure, could be better. But that being said, for what it's worth, what I like most is the fact that the gameplay is still solid, and they at least tried some fashion of remastering stuff, although not as much as they can. But the main takeaway is the fact that the Sonic brand is one that, regardless of what people say, knows when to continue onwards and upwards without worrying about stumbling constantly. And another thing I like most is the fact that the franchise has so many colorful characters, each with distinct personalities and powers from one another. I mean, apart from Sonic, you have characters like Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Shadow, Rouge, Big the Cat, Cream the Rabbit. You have plenty of creatures that Sonic rescues. You have characters that feel specific to the Sonic universe, like the Chows, enemies like Dr. Eggman, and it's just a huge selection of distinct characters to look into from different games, different shows, and some of the other uncommon media, like whether it's comics or even things like the movie and the OVA by extension. But yeah, I'd say that there's a lot to celebrate when it comes to the Sonic franchise. As for my own experience, I remember getting Sonic Heroes as well as trying out some of the other stuff. I also tried out Shadow the Hedgehog, which was very disappointing if you ask me. People tend to say Sonic Heroes is a bad game, but I think that, while not 100% perfect, it's a lot better than people say it is. The only thing it could use is a little more of a clear direction in terms of what you need to do in some instances. And of course, Egg Emperor is a pain in the ass. But Shadow the Hedgehog, I think, is worse because it just feels more less polished. It just feels a lot more convoluted, and it's very underwhelming in terms of its approach. People always say that, oh, like Shadow the Hedgehog is very edgy and whatnot, but for the most part, I think that at least he is able to stand out amongst everyone else because you have other slices of Sonic characters to look into. Some that are cocky, some that are brash, some that are happy-go-lucky, some that are very distinct from each other. Especially in Sonic Heroes, where you have a colorful selection of characters, each with different attributes. But with Shadow the Hedgehog, it felt much more irritating to look into Shadow's edgy stuff because it just feels very boring and irritating and goofy as hell. Unintentionally, mind you, but still, it's pretty bad. I also tried out stuff like Sonic Unleashed, and I remember trying out Sonic Colors as well as giving Generations a shot. I tried out some of the older games, well, not necessarily on the PlayStation 2, on the DS version that has the older Sonic stuff, which was alright, but considering the fact that it was on a DS, you were going to have to expect certain limitations. On top of that, I also have to comment on the problem that I have with uh, the way Boom was presenting itself, because It's strange to look into Sonic Boom because the games themselves feel like your typical TV show cash-ins, but the show itself isn't actually that bad. Video game TV shows are kind of a weird thing to talk about, but Sonic Boom feels better than expected, but the games are pretty bad still, especially considering the fact that they aim so much lower than the rest of the Sonic franchise for the most part. But going past that, I do have to comment on Sonic Mania by saying that, while it is iconic and it is good stuff, it does get overrated a lot just because of the fans. It's like, come on, yeah, I get it. Sonic Mania is great, but like, there are other Sonic games to try out too. And way too people try and go after me just because I have specific opinions on other franchises. But Sonic Forces was inferior as a product, but felt more original in some ways, even if it's not 100% perfect or close to perfect. But you know what I'm saying? In terms of other media that Sonic was in, I had to comment on the TV shows because I never saw much of Saturday AM, but I do remember watching The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, which is more of your like cartoony look. Your Saturday, like it's like okay, Sonic Saturday AM is more. It's like more action based. It's more serious. It's got more serious moments in it. Whereas Sonic the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog is more kid friendly, more family friendly in a way. It's more comedic, which kind of puts it on par with stuff like the Adventures of Super Mario Bros. Super Show or the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. You're going to turn into a Goomba and other stuff like the Zelda cartoon and the first two seasons of Sailor Moon. Whereas Saturday M feels more in line with stuff like not exactly like the shows I'm about to mention, but it feels more on par with stuff like uh, Reboot, the '90s Fox Marvel shows in some fashion, and of course we get Sonic Underground, which was okay, but not really that special. The addition of other characters is weird, like Sonya and Manic, kind of weird. And of course, the instrumental theme is one thing, but considering the fact that it's its own canon, it's okay. The OVA I think is pretty good overall, especially considering the fact that it was made by Toei, and the personality that was put into the characters already is very good, especially when it comes to Sonic, and of course his rivalry with Metal Sonic. And you can't forget about Knuckles wearing that cowboy hat. And fast forward with the animation, we get into Sonic X, which is kind of amusing because I remember watching Sonic X, yet I can't remember a single line of dialogue. Yeah, that's kind of weird because some shows I remember the lines a lot from. Like, I know the lines from stuff like SpongeBob, Jimmy Neutron, Fairly Odd Parents, but I can't remember the lines of, like, anime back then when I was younger for some reason. I don't know why. That's because of how hyperactive everything was compared to the other stuff I watch. I don't know, it's just weird. But looking back on Sonic X, it was your typical localization of anime made back then. And while I'm not going to act like your typical weeb that loses their shit just because there was some sort of localization difference, I mean, I'm not going to get triggered just because Brock from Pokemon mentions jelly donuts. It is still kind of amusing to look back on this sort of stuff and then realize the fact that it's odd how anime tends to have some censorship added in, but some stuff gets okay in US cartoons. Like, is it me or is it weird to see stuff like that get changed, whereas stuff like Gargoyles gets away with a character getting shot? I don't know. And I don't really think I should revisit Sonic X at some point. Maybe I should, but it's kind of weird. Like, I don't know. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. And as for my thoughts on the Sonic movie, well, I already mentioned what I think about it, and after doing a rewatch with one of my other cousins not too long ago, a few months ago, that was an alright movie. It's definitely more like your typical, uh, like cartoon type character in the real world, although it's a video game character in this case. And while it may juxtapose the production qualities of stuff like the Transformers movies and Ninja Turtle movies in terms of IPs that Paramount like uses from other companies, like it is a decent movie overall. Like not as meaty as something like the first Transformers movie or the first Ninja Turtles from Paramount, but it does its job okay. And considering how long I've gone on with all these other things, there's not much else for me to say about Sonic beyond just the fact that, like, regardless of his up and downs, I do look forward to seeing more from the character and his buddies and the rest of the franchise in the future. I hope Sonic Rangers is a good game, and I hope that the Sonic Colors remaster is worth delving into. But that'll do it for me, guys. I wish everyone else was with me for this episode, but unfortunately the show must go on, and I'm the only one available, so there's that. But until next time, guys, see you later.